One of my favorite cartoons is of a little boy sitting next to the Christmas tree late on Christmas morning. He's surrounded by toys and games and boxes and wrapping paper. The little boy looks up at his mother and he says, "I'm bored." You know, we always dream about getting that perfect gift, don't we? But even when we do get the one thing we've been begging and hoping for, sooner or later the gift fades. The excitement vanishes. And we have to wait for next Christmas when we really might get the perfect gift. I was around 4 years old when I received probably the closest thing to the perfect gift at Christmas. I remember it was still dark outside when we got up on that Christmas morning, but my brothers Tim, Dan, and I walked into the living room, and the lights were lit on the tree, and under that colorful glow were presents everywhere. And there it was, the perfect gift. I stood speechless, and after a moment, Tim finally squealed out while we were all thinking, "Cars! Cars!" Because under the tree were these three shiny metal cars. Back then, they did not use plastic for those toys, they put real metal. They were big enough to sit in, and with pedals that turned the wheels. You know, I don't know how we did it, but we all instinctively knew which vehicle Santa had left for us. Dan jumped in the blue 1959 model sedan. Tim claimed the green Army Jeep with the front window that went up and down like the real thing. And I jumped in the bright red fire truck with the real silver bell and a wooden ladder. You know, I think we sat in those vehicles all morning, opening the rest of our presents and eating Christmas candy and probably breakfast as well. Mom and Dad probably had to make us get out of them to go get dressed eventually. And on the first warm day we took them outside and went up and down the street with Dan making the sound of an engine roaring, Tim shooting the enemy from the front seat, and I was ringing my bell. But even with that perfect gift, the thrill did not last. Eventually, we lost interest in the cars. Maybe we outgrew them. Maybe our legs got too long to fit in there. I don't know. Before too long, we did not even realize it, and Dad had stored them away in the garage. And at some point, Dad threw them away. Although I'm sure they were probably pretty well banged up and maybe even a little rusty by then, the truth is, we did not even notice it when they were gone. Giving gifts at Christmas and trying to find the perfect gift has long been part of the holiday season. You know, retailers love the tradition so much that they start advertising about it in late summer or even earlier. The day after Thanksgiving is the biggest retail day for some stores all year. And the Christmas season brings in as much money for some merchants as they make all the rest of the year. Did you know the custom of giving gifts at Christmas is based on the Magi, or wise men, or kings, whichever word you prefer. And their story is found only in Matthew chapter 2. Sadly, the wise men have become caricatures of the Christmas story. From our mental picture of three strange-looking people dressed in brightly colored robes bouncing on the backs of camels, to the corruption of the carol, "We three kings of Orient are smoking on a rubber cigar." Right? We don't give them any respect. The man suggests that the wise men did something that we always try to do, but usually fall short in accomplishing. They gave the perfect gift. If you have your Bibles, follow along as I read Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, and the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly, and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. After they heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in the dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Now, it's not exactly clear when the wise men showed up, but it probably wasn't on the night Jesus was born, because our text says they found him in a house. Although some scholars today say Mary and Joseph never stayed in a cave or a barn, rather they were in a downstairs area of a house where the farm animals were often kept, and where a manger or feeding trough was developed, because there was no room upstairs in the homes of any of the relatives of Joseph. Remember, they were there, the whole extended family was there in Bethlehem for the census. Now, Jewish tradition called for a 40-day purification period after the birth of a child, when the mother was to rest and care for the infant. Maybe after Jesus was born, a room was found upstairs for Mary and Joseph. In addition, they were in Bethlehem, as I mentioned, for the census, and that probably took a few weeks to finish up, maybe even longer than that, bureaucracy. They would certainly not leave before that task was completed. Because of what we will read next week about Herod killing all the babies 2 years old and under, some believe it could have been as long as 2 years after the birth of Jesus before the Magi arrived. I think maybe the star first appeared 2 years before, but maybe not the birth, because it doesn't make much sense, since Mary and Joseph weren't from Bethlehem, and they had no reason to stay there after the census was taken and the purification period was over. Joseph, remember, had his carpenter shop in Nazareth. That was his home. So the wise men probably arrived within a couple months of Jesus' birth. But who were these wise men? We call them wise men, kings, or magi. What does that mean, and why do they get 3 titles? Well, in the book of Daniel, magi are mentioned and called priests. They were from modern-day Iraq, and they practiced various forms of astrology and interpreted dreams. Since they were also very well educated, because they studied all forms of religion and faith, they were also called wise men. And since they were also very rich, they had the title of king. We don't know from our text how many wise men traveled to Bethlehem, but since they had 3 gifts, it has long been assumed that there were 3 of them. In fact, by the 6th century, a whole tradition had sprung up around them that included their names. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce those names. How they knew the star they saw represented the birth of the King of the Jews is also unknown. Being stargazers, a new star would attract their attention, and they would try to find some spiritual meaning behind this new star. Some believe that since there was a large amount of Jewish people living in Babylon, they had heard the stories and the hopes many had that God would soon send the Messiah to save them. And since the star pointed in the direction of Israel, it all seemed to fit together. So they naturally traveled to Jerusalem, the capital, to seek the king. And while they were there, Herod's advisors, many who were Jewish, mentioned the prophecy from Micah that I just read about the Savior being born in Bethlehem. It would not be hard to find Jesus in that real small village of Bethlehem. And in addition to that, the shepherds may have still been spreading the good news they had seen. So everyone in Bethlehem knew where Mary and the baby were. This morning, let's look at the gifts the wise men brought. At first glance, especially from our perspective, they may seem strange and even useless to the baby Jesus. But when we look at it at another perspective, we can see that they were actually perfect gifts. The Magi probably had no idea of the deeper meaning these gifts had or how they were perfect. They only knew that they were going to visit someone who was a king. And you did not visit someone like a king unless you had a gift to bring. Because coming empty-handed was not only rude, but could be a very dangerous slap in the face. The king could throw you in jail, a king could kill you for that if you didn't bring him a gift and tribute. The Magi brought some of the most expensive and valuable items they had. It's not known how much of these gifts they brought, but the suggestion in verse 11 that they opened their treasures, or in other words, opened up boxes they had the gifts in, suggests that it was probably a pretty good-sized amount. Usually, the picture we have of the wise men, they have a little box in their hand with a gift inside, but probably there were big boxes that other camels carried behind them as well. So this morning, let's look at the perfect gifts. The first gift was gold. Gold. Of all three gifts, this one makes the most sense to us, doesn't it? Gold has always had great value. Now, although the baby could not play with the gift, gold could be used to pay for a lot of the expenses Joseph and his family had, especially expenses they would have very shortly when they had to flee to Egypt. That's not cheap. Way back in Genesis chapter 2, we have the first reference to gold. At the beginning of verse 10, it says, "Listen, a river watered the garden flowed from Eden, and from there it divided. It had 4 set streams. The name of the first is the Pishon. It winds to the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of that land is good." In Genesis chapter 24, we read how Isaac used gold as a gift to win the favor of Rebekah. In Esther chapter 1, we read about the palace of Xerxes, the king of Persia, where there were couches made of gold, and wine was served in golden goblets. In Exodus chapters 35 to 38, we read how all the items of the tabernacle were built with gold. A little over a ton of gold was used, according to Exodus chapter 38, verse 24. And when the temple was rebuilt, according to Nehemiah chapter 7, over 840 pounds of gold was used in the construction. 1 Kings chapter 10 tells us that Solomon received 25 tons of gold every year. Think about that. That's roughly the equivalent, the gold prices change, but roughly the equivalent of $200 million a year, BBC. Gold represents wealth. And the Magi brought Jesus a symbol of the material possessions. In other words, they gave him their money. Now, we hate to talk about money in church because it sounds so unholy. Yet you cannot read through the Bible and ignore the concept of giving your material possessions. Given with the right attitude, money becomes a perfect gift to God. Randy was the church treasurer, and every Sunday he would gather the offering and put it in a bag to take to the bank on Monday. One Sunday, his little son Darren saw him put the money in the bag and watched silently as Randy took the money home. Randy put the money on top of a bookcase, and Darren sat down and kept his eyes on that money. After a while, his mom asked him, "What are you doing?" And Darren answered, "I'm waiting for Jesus to come and pick up his money." 2 Corinthians talks about not giving reluctantly or under compulsion, but cheerfully, because God loves a cheerful giver. You see, we often confuse our giving at church with budgets and weekly needs, deficits and savings. Now, those things are important in the practical functioning of our church. Leon mentioned that this morning, that we have to have that to be able to operate, to be able to continue. But they have absolutely nothing to do with our giving. Being a cheerful giver does not necessarily mean we are happy with the budget. It means we love Jesus and want to express our love to Him with our gift of gold. What kind of gift have you brought today? The next gift is frankincense. Frankincense. Now, many modern translations, in fact the one I read, say incense, but incense is too generic a word. Matthew was talking about the specific incense here called frankincense. Today we usually associate incense with college students or hippies from the 60s. But incense has been used for centuries as an air freshener, as a method of fumigation, and as a mood setter. Now, frankincense is not Dr. Frankenstein's monster, but a mixture of the gum from trees found in the Far East that make a very hard, white substance and had a very aromatic smell when it was burned. Frankincense is mentioned 17 times in the Bible, usually in connection with an offering or worship. In Exodus chapter 30, the people were told not to use frankincense for their personal use, but only to worship God. So frankincense became associated primarily with worship. When the people smelled its unique odor, they thought of God. Our sense of smell, you see, is great. And certain odors can trigger powerful images and memories, can't they? The smell of newly cut grass, a fresh baked pod, the scent of a pine tree, or a particular perfume can make us think of certain events, certain people. Well, God understands the power of smell and decided to allow frankincense to represent the smell of worship to the Israelites. Why would the wise men bring such a gift to Jesus? Mary and Joseph could not use it to freshen up the house. The wise men, as we mentioned earlier, had read the Bible, and they knew a Jewish family could only use that incense for worship. So giving Jesus frankincense was acknowledging that this baby was the Son of God. In other words, it was an act of worship. One year, we were given an artificial Christmas tree. Now, it wasn't a bad tree, but it did not smell like a Christmas tree. So I went out and bought a bottle called Christmas Tree Scent. And I sprayed it on. Well, even though it had a faint pine smell, it really smelled more like bad perfume. Because you see, nothing can really imitate the smell of a real Christmas tree.
Amen.
What does our church smell like? We do not use incense in our worship, but our church still has a smell. Is that odor pleasant or offensive? Our incense that God smells from our worship this morning is not a perfume, but an attitude. In Isaiah chapter 1, God says, "Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me." You see, our perfect gift is not just showing up for church as if we are fulfilling some kind of obligation. Our perfect gift is actually coming to worship. Have you brought your perfect gift today? Have you brought yourself to worship? Well, finally, we see the gift of myrrh. The gift of myrrh. Myrrh is an expensive perfume. I have found at least 3 different uses for myrrh in the Bible. In the book of Exodus, it was used to anoint someone or set them apart for a holy work. Ironically, in the Gospel of John, myrrh was one of the spices used by the women to prepare the body of Jesus for burial. But primarily, myrrh was used simply to make you look or smell good. We are told in the book of Esther that the women vying to be the next queen underwent a year-long beauty treatment program to make themselves more attractive. And this treatment included the liberal use of myrrh. Very simply, myrrh was used to make you smell good, or to present yourself at your best. That's something we all want, isn't it? If you go on a job interview, you would at least wash your face, comb your hair, put on clean and pressed clothes, and wear a little deodorant or perfume, right? How do we go to church? Now, we understand that God is not impressed by how good we smell, and He's not offended if we need a bath, nor does He really care what kind of clothes we wear. But God is concerned with the quality of myrrh we offer Him. Not quality in terms of being dressed nice or smelling good, but quality in terms of giving your best. What do you give to a God who has everything? You give Him a perfect gift. You give Him your whole life. I heard a commercial, I don't remember who it was for, but the guy was giving gifts to his family. But instead of giving them what they really wanted, he gave them something less. Among other things, he said, "To my daughter who wanted a puppy, I give this gerbil." Now, how disappointing would that be? And how disappointing must it be for God to receive less than our best? Give of your best to the Master, the old hymn says, and yet we casually toss God our leftovers and anything we no longer need. At one church I served, the youth room constantly got different furniture. Unfortunately, it was always old, worn out, and broken down pieces of furniture that the owner no longer wanted. If it was not good enough for their own house, what makes you think it was good enough for church? Give of the strength of your youth, the song continues. But how often do we say, "Later, God, when I'm older, or the kids are gone, or I'm retired"? However, you know tomorrow never comes. Today is all we have. Several years ago, I read the saddest obituary I've ever read. It gave all the normal statistics: when he was born, when he died, who he married, how many children and grandchildren survived, where he worked, etc. But then it said he always wanted to write a book. This person was 80 years old when he died, but he had always put off what he wanted to do until it was too late. Give God your best right now. The old hymn goes, "Throw your soul's fresh glowing ardor into the battle for truth." Ardor is our intensity, our passion. Do we throw ourselves into the battle for truth with all our zeal, or do we save that for other things like, I don't know, sports or a job? Give Him your loyal devotion, the song reminds us. Today's surveys show most people have no deep devotion to any particular church. They would go wherever they're made to feel good. A loyal devotion, you see, is a commitment. It means, among other things, putting up with things even when they aren't perfect. Any married couple who have celebrated milestone anniversaries of 25, 40, or 50 or more years will tell you, if they're completely honest, that the years were not always filled with marital bliss. There were hard times. There were struggles. There was a drudgery of everyday living. But because of their devotion to one another, they stuck it out. God is looking for that kind of stubborn devotion from us as well. Finally, the song says, "Give Him the best that you have. Your best gold, your best frankincense, your best myrrh." Have you brought your perfect gift today?